1. This happened in January 21st of 2010. I know the date because I still have the photos that I took of the house. I was house hunting for a friend that I met online. She and her husband live in Boston, Massachusetts. We spoke on the phone often. They were looking for a place to rent in Boston, but the prices were so incredibly high. I had joked around about them moving to Kansas, where I lived for a good 5 years, and I was kind of shocked when they asked me to check out some places here for them. Our rent is much cheaper for much nicer places, and their jobs would be about the same pay. So they would be able to save up to buy a house. Anyway, my hubby and I went to check out one house they found online that was incredibly cheap. They were sure they could get a loan to buy it, and knew it was a fixer-upper. Fixer-upper didn't even begin to describe this house. It would have been cheaper to bulldoze that sucker and start from scratch. It was in atrocious condition. So, we are touring the house with a realtor. I'm taking pictures and short videos to send them. The house was built in 1918, warped floors, kitchen ceiling ripped out, front porch falling off the house. Bathroom's floor felt like you were walking on marshmallows. All was okay until we went upstairs. I made it to the first landing and got very dizzy. Kind of weird, but shit happens. There was a master bedroom, a second bedroom, and a full bath. I looked in all of the rooms, documenting everything with my camera. We were standing in the short hallway between the 3 rooms, when the realtor came up and started talking to us. I had my back to the door of the second bedroom. All of a sudden, I felt like I was being rushed from behind. I turned my head quickly around. No visible person was there, but I could see and hear him in my mind. He looked to be in his early 30s, about 5'8", longish light brown hair. He was wearing a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and larger 70s-style wire-rimmed glasses. He actually looked a little like David Koresh. He got nose to nose with me and started screaming, "Get out! This is my house! My house! Get the fuck out!" The anger on his face was unreal. I was done. I hit the stairs and was headed to the door. My husband close on my heels. We got outside and he was looking pretty shook up too. I asked him what was wrong. I didn't know if he saw the guy and was freaking. I had to ask him a couple of times when he finally told me. When he was in the second bedroom, when we first went upstairs, a vision of his mom told him to get out, you need to leave, it's not safe. I was shocked because he doesn't believe in the paranormal. Well, maybe he does, but won't admit that he does. It was so unlike him to admit that he had seen something he couldn't explain. We spoke to the realtor briefly and then left. On the way home, I told him what happened to me. He told me he saw me looking behind myself in the hall and that I looked really scared. Fuck that falling down house and its creepy-ass guy. It's all his, he can keep it, forever. 2. Usually I keep my paranormal stories to myself, as they're usually either too difficult to put into words, or too mundane for me to want to write out a big, long paragraph about them. However, this was too strange and perplexing not to share. I live near an old canal in Canada, which ships passed through in order to get to the Great Lakes. Supposedly hundreds of workers died while building it, and it's thought surrounding areas are haunted. While I am a believer in ghosts, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to whip out a digital recorder or spirit box and demand answers without experiencing activity. On top of that, since it's outside, that leaves a lot of contamination from the wind, rushing water, branches and plants moving, cars on nearby roads. You get the idea. I didn't really think too much of paranormal activity going on, until over time, I noticed strange things. Back in August, while watching a meteor shower, I heard a woman's laugh coming from the forest area bordering the canal. It was around 1 in the morning. I heard no other voices indicating it was someone with a group of people. In October, I was walking with one of my friends, Jordan, when he said he saw something tall, grey and human-shaped stand up and move backwards into the foliage and out of sight. While I thought it could have been a person, he said they appeared to be 8 to 9 feet tall. We're both around 6 feet. He said whatever that grey thing was, it was certainly taller than us. Months down the road, I didn't think much about the weird things going on in the canal. I had other things on my mind usually, but yesterday 2 of my friends offered me to walk down a path that runs along said canal. I agreed, and it's worth noting, where we walked was nowhere near where the previously mentioned things occurred. We walked for a while, enjoying the sunset and the warm temperature. After a few minutes we came up to a stone foundation of an old building, now splattered with graffiti. Chunks of broken brick, rocks, and pieces of beer bottles littered the floor. There didn't seem to be much to explore. It was just basically a large concrete slab on the ground with remains of a crumbled wall. While just looking around, we noticed a pungent odor. It was a very revolting scent that I was convinced must have been a dead animal only a few feet away. It was so distinct I could taste it in the back of my throat. I'm sure we've all smelled something that was so strong you can taste it. Not to mention my eyes watered a bit. We noticed a jacket laying among some tall grass, immediately adjacent to the fountain. It wasn't old-fashioned or anything, nor did it appear to be out there a long time. No mud splotches or rips or tears in it. It was like someone took a perfectly good jacket and left it on the ground. The putrid smell seemed to be emanating off the jacket, so with morbid curiosity, I snatched a stick off the ground and poked the jacket once with it. Here's where it gets most mind-boggling. As soon as the stick made connection with the jacket, the smell was gone. You know how, like, if you eat a pizza or something and a few minutes later, you walk back into the room and the pizza smell is just faintly lingering? There was no smell hanging around here. It was completely gone. After prodding the jacket a bit more and lifting it up slightly, nothing seemed to be underneath. I'm not just chalking this scent up to, yep, it's 100% confirmed a ghost. But I'm really trying to think of a good explanation for why all 3 of us smelled something so rancid. And then in a moment's time, it vanished. 3. To start off, let me just say that this happened at SeaWorld in San Diego. Also, this is a very short story and I'm mostly looking to see if others have had odd experiences there as well. I used to be a part of the night crew at SeaWorld, basically just night janitors. Super glamorous job. The night crew there all have their little variety of ghost stories, ranging from a voice on the back roads to actual visible entities within the park. Things like a child who runs around in the little Sesame Street area, or a couple dancing on the water in the bay behind the park. There's also some rumor about something that causes general mischief if you pick on the animals. Now the Atlantis ride, where this happened, is a very creepy place at night. It's generally the first place that gets its lights turned off at night, and becomes basically pitch black. Extremely silent, you're all alone doing trash cans, and it just always feels like there's something lurking around there. More than once, I'll admit, I may have just ditched a trash can or 2 that I possibly could have gotten just because I did not want to stick around. Eventually I learned to head there first thing in the shift while the sun was up or the lights were still on. So I'm working there first thing, getting my trash cans, music at max volume, earbuds. I'm still not sure what happened, but the volume suddenly dived down. It was pretty much just above being muted. There was no message, because I had to manually turn it back up. And it wasn't like I accidentally pushed it in my pocket, because it didn't gradually get quieter. It was like it was a 10, and then it just deleted the 0, leaving me at a 1. I found out later that night that the other person working the trash cans in the park is split up into east and west, 2 people working the cans a night, had almost the exact same situation happen to them that night. Because SeaWorld is such a tourist spot and employs so many people, I was wondering if any others had similar experiences visiting the park, working at the park, or even just being in the area around it. There are 2 or 3 hotels on the same little island as it, and the bay has a good few boats running through it. 4. So I've got this issue, and it's been happening for a couple months now. It's getting progressively worse, and any advice would be helpful. This is pretty long, so just bear with me. My boyfriend and I were at a friend's house a couple months ago for Australia Day. A friend and I went to the service station for those who aren't Australian, and on our way back there was a mound of trash outside someone's house. We looked in it, found a hat, a stubby holder, and I picked up this bear. Now, it's one of those really expensive bears, probably worth a few hundred, and it was in perfect condition, so I didn't understand why someone would just throw it away. But thought I would take it so I could sell it, because why not, right? This is when shit got weird. I put the bear in the room my boyfriend and I were staying and went outside with my mates. When I came back, the bear had moved. Not completely, though. It looked like it may have just been knocked, but it was looking directly at me when I walked in the room. And that wasn't how I left it. Feeling weirded out, I put it face down so its beady little eyes weren't staring into my soul, and the lights started to flicker above me. Truth be told, I don't think I've ever boosted out of a room so fast in my life. I told my boyfriend and he instantly told me, "The bear's haunted, throw it away." But I wasn't really buying into the superstition until the lights in my friend's house started to flicker whenever I was below them. When we left the house, I put the bear in the boot of my car, and it still remains there to this day. I should get rid of it, but I'm scared that if it really is haunting me, it will come back. Or what's happening might get worse. I've also thought about burning it, but I think that'll be an even worse idea. For about 2 weeks, the bear was in my boot and nothing happened. But one day my boyfriend and I were driving to my house, and a streetlight went out just over the top of me. It happened again just down the road, and again just before we got to my house. We thought it was really odd, obviously, but the bear didn't even pop into my mind at that point. Since then, it's been happening more and more. Streetlights cut out when I drive past them. The lights of rooms I enter flicker, no matter whose house I'm in. And the other day, a car's headlights just stopped working when I drove past it. I've thought about every option in regards to lighting failures, but this happens way too regularly and only to me, so I don't think it's a coincidence. I'm at a loss here. It's not dangerous, it's just creepy, but I'm worried the lights are only the beginning. So if anyone has any tips, it would be helpful. 5. I would like to preface my story by saying that yes, I am a believer, and I am open to debunking things. But I have been unable to do so for any personal experiences, hence believer. Let me set the scene. The land my grandma owns is incredibly haunted. Not just her house, but all of the houses on this section of the road that she owns. My grandparents had bought the land and the subsequent farmhouse that rested upon it, and that's where my ma and uncle grew up. The farmhouse was built in 1826 and was already 150 years old when they moved into it in 1976. My parents had built our house across the forest, essentially on the other side of the block, though this is in the country, across from the old house. There's a long field with faded trails between the backyards, far enough that you can't see the houses from one end or the other, with forest and swampy areas on either side behind the rows of lots. We had to sell the house when I was younger, so we live elsewhere now. My grandma and ma now live in a newer house built right next to the farmhouse, whereas my papa and I live in a nearby town, and my uncle and his family have lived in the farmhouse since my grandma moved out. We don't know much about the history of the land except that Native Americans used to live on it, however long ago that was. In one of the forested areas behind my grandma's newer house, dubbed the Shadow Woods, there's remnants of old teepees and arrowheads and stuff. My grandpa kept a junk pile for old tires and things back where they were found, but never moved anything. And a lot of it is hidden by the brush, trash, or rotted away by now. It's the only spot on the whole property that we found these things. The reason I mention this is because I feel it might have a part to play in my experience, especially so since the Shadow Woods are right behind my grandma's newer house, and her back patio grass door faces it directly. There's so many stories I have to tell about this place, but I'll save them for next time. My own personal experience deals with an entity that I don't even know. It's hard to explain it after so long. I've told bits and pieces of what's happened to some friends and family before, but not all of it. No, not all. My family likes to take day trips to the beach in the summer, only a couple of hours away over the border, and I've been doing so since my mother was young, and since I and my cousins were young. The area around this beach is actually where my parents met, so this place is very important to my family. Half of the beach and large portions of the surrounding land are also owned by the Native Americans. On one beach trip, around when I was in middle school, about 11 years old, we had a fun time as always. I was with my ma, aunt, younger cousin, and a close friend, and we were there from 10 a.m. until about 10 p.m. When I was little, I used to be confused as to why we were never allowed on the other half of the beach, even though it was empty on a hot, busy day. But my ma thoroughly explained to me about all of the property dealings and disputes over it. I never tried to go over to the other side until this instance. It was the first and last time I have ever stepped foot on the other side of that beach. I did so while explaining to my friend, let's call her Chai, the reasons we couldn't go on the other side, since she inevitably had the same questions as I once did. Being kids, however, we got to teasing the invisible line we weren't supposed to cross, to see how far we could get. My cousin, let's call her Honey, didn't really participate, and just stayed around the wooden post near where cars bring boats down to the water. Chai didn't get more than 5 feet in before turning around, and I didn't get more than 10 feet before I saw it. It was a figure dark and tall, standing in the tree line behind the beach. The sight made me stop in my tracks for a full minute, and all I could see was the half of the figure that wasn't hidden by a tree. I was unable to make out any details, just a silhouette. I couldn't move, and it's kind of hard to explain, but I was entranced. Like I didn't hear anything, even though the others were talking to me. And I felt stuck, the world almost going fuzzy except for that figure. Then I just snapped out of it, and I was suddenly back on the correct side of the pots. Honey and Chai noticed I had spaced out, because I didn't laugh at any of the jokes they were making. Which is unlike me, I love jokes. But when I looked at them, I guess I must have seemed too weird. Chai hurried me and my cousin across the sand, and I didn't really recover for at least a good hour after that. I mentioned the figure, though neither of them had seen it, and my mom said it was probably just a Native American wandering and making sure no one was going over there. Though I remember that she was a bit spooked when I first spoke of it, and kept a watchful eye across the beach the rest of the day. We both knew that no one ever wandered over there, Native American or locals, and there were no settlements near the beachfront on that side that someone could live in for many miles. The rest of the day went fine and fun, all of us forgetting about the odd encounter, and we were on our way back home well after the sun had went down. I sat by one of the windows in the back on the driver's side with Chai in the middle and Honey next to the other window. That's when I saw it. Outside the window, moving along the car in the grass, was a shadow. Now I know what you're thinking, it's just the car's shadow. There was no sun, streetlights, or other traffic that would have cast a shadow like that. And it was darker than black, almost like a void. It was just us driving along the deserted stretch of road for over an hour before we hit thicker towns the closer we got to the border. It's just your eyes playing tricks on you in the dark. Maybe, but this shadowy thing wasn't there before for the first part of the drive, and nothing in the landscape changed. It wasn't as big as the car, but it was big, maybe door-sized. It was bounding next to the car in a gait that was mixed between a man's, something like a dog, and just floating around the grass and stalks of corn. Sometimes it would dash under the car, sometimes on top, sometimes it would climb over and under the few passing cars or disappear completely for a few moments before reappearing. There was something like the ghosting of eyes, hardy-har, but they were a dark red, sometimes growling brightly and staring at me as it bounded along with us, sometimes dim and hollow, nearly gone. I got that trance-like feeling again, and I couldn't take my eyes off of it for the whole ride. It lasted nearly the entire drive home. Even when we crossed the bridge and got into towns, sometimes it would disappear for a few minutes, but then it would just crawl back out from under our car or a passing one, and continue moving beside us, glancing my way. At one point I remember asking Chai if she had seen the thing following us, very quietly so I wouldn't wake my cousin or alert the adults. And she said, "What? That shadow thing?" I'd never felt more relieved and scared in the same moment to know that I wasn't alone. That peculiar feeling never faded either, not even when we drove through much larger cities and the shadow vanished for a time. It was always there, lurking, like a chill up my spine. Once we reached a bigger city, my aunt needed to visit her sister, so we stopped at her place. My mom didn't really want to stop for long, because this city is notoriously shady. So she told us they'd only be a few minutes as her and my aunt went inside the house, and left us girls in the car. By that time I hadn't seen this shadow for a good 10 minutes, and the feeling of dread and apathy had faded, so I thought the thing had finally left me alone. I was very, very wrong. I had just begun telling Chai more about the shadow, how it seemed like it had followed us all the way from the beach, and was filling in my newly awoken cousin when it happened. Through the window on Honey's side, I saw a figure standing down the street at the corner, all black underneath a street lamp, and completely still. It was shaped like a man and really tall, like half the height of the lamppost at the least. I remember thinking, how is that man so dark underneath the light, right before it hit me? I was transfixed, couldn't move, couldn't speak, I was so scared. Chai and Honey soon turned to look out the window as well once they saw my stricken state, and they both froze. It was silent for a few tense seconds before I asked, "You guys can see it too, right?" Chai agreed. Honey turned to us like, "This isn't funny, guys, you're just trying to scare me." Now how could we have been able to do that? Conjure a shadow man out of nothing to just pull a prank? I don't think so. The figure soon started to move towards us, not taking steps, just lurching. Like it would dip forward a few steps, then straighten up, and stand there staring. It would do this from one side of the street to the next and back again, from car to car, sidewalk to sidewalk, just slowly inching its way down the street. Lurch, stop, lurch, stop, lurch. Getting even closer. It was slow. Honey started freaking out and unbuckling her seatbelt, climbing into the floor space where my legs were supposed to be. Chai completely leaned into me, holding my arm. The others started to scream and try to get the adults' attention in the house, even though there was absolutely no way they would hear us. I was quiet, petrified, and unable to do anything but watch. Honey had just wiggled around in the front seat to slam on the car horn when the figure reached the corner of the neighbor's fence. The fence was casting a shadow on the sidewalk where it had stopped, and the shadow was completely hidden except for its red eyes. Then those were gone, and the feeling left. The other two were still yelling when my ma and aunt finally came out, surely giving them a fright when we started going on about how there was a man stalking us on the street. Both had looked over at the fence, but saw nothing. The city is infamously dangerous, especially at night, so real man or not, my ma was very eager for us to leave at that point. Chai and I shared a knowing look, because that definitely wasn't a man. It wasn't even human. We'd arrived back at my grandma's house after dropping off my cousin and aunt next door, and were going to spend the night and take Chai home the next day. I didn't want to get out of the car at that point, since the anxiously familiar feeling had plagued me the rest of the ride back, and both my friend and I had spotted red eyes peering into the car from the side of the road along the way. Settling in for the night, I looked outside through my grandma's back patio door. I don't know why I looked. It was pitch black outside except for her yard light, which just illuminates the lower deck, and the bird feeders, nothing beyond. And as my luck that day would have it, there the shadow was. The thing stood right in the middle of the lower deck, in full light, yet with no discernible features. It wasn't quite humanoid-shaped anymore, just a sort of thick black cloud with red eyes. I was entranced yet again, though this time I wasn't afraid. This time I paid closer attention to it, curious as to what it wanted. I don't really know how to explain this without sounding like a weirdo, but I'm already this deep into the story, so I might as well. I was absolutely positive that the shadow didn't want to hurt me. I don't know why I felt this, or if it was even me that was making me feel this way. But it's the truth. For some reason, I was sure that it didn't want to harm me, didn't want to scare me. It just wanted to be noticed. After a few minutes, which felt like hours, the shadow turned around and began moving out across the yard. It kept glancing back like it was looking over its shoulder at me, almost as if it was making sure I was still there. Once I saw it reach the grass line on the edge of the yard underneath the moonlight, the shadow still blacker than the black night, it turned and looked at me fully. I placed my hand on the glass. It turned around and knelt down on the grass, and bounded away out of sight. The trance was gone, and I only felt wistfulness as it left, almost like I missed the damn thing. I wouldn't have to wait long before seeing it again. So since this shadow creature had followed me all the way back from another country, it took a liking to my grandma's property. I'm not surprised, really. That place is a hotspot for the paranormal, and my family and I are positive there's several other things there. I also suspected it may have had something to do with the Native American history of the place, as it had essentially moved from one Native American reserve to whatever the hell my grandma's property is. What was odd about this entity, though, is that it seemed to have a strange connection with me, if that weren't obvious at this point. I would see it every time I went over to my grandma's house for the next God knows how many years. It's really odd to think about it objectively now, and to try to figure out exact timelines. You have to understand, this thing became such a staple in my life that I would sometimes even be eager to see it. Yeah, eager. It was very weird, to say the least. The shadow would always duck around the edge of the yard in the grass, even in broad daylight. It would weave through the grass and bushes, occasionally scaring out a rabbit or bird, and poke its head up to look at me through the sliding glass door. At night was the only time it would come right up to the window, and it would sit with me. I used to get left alone at my grandma's house a lot whenever her and my ma went out, and sometimes my cousin Honey would be left with me. She saw it a few times too, out in the yard at the edge of the grass line, and I remember trying to convince her it wasn't a threat. The entity never seemed to want to hurt me. It just watched me play as vividly as I watched it. I don't know if Honey quite remembers those instances, but the thing didn't like being seen by anyone but me. If she were over, it would usually disappear back towards the woods. My grandma never saw anything, and still sometimes refuses seeing some of the other things going on, but she's come around recently. And my ma sees more around the house than I do. I don't think she ever saw it, though. Or if she has, she hasn't said anything about it. I knew deep inside that this creature couldn't be something inherently good. After all, what kind of black shadow with red eyes ever is? However, it could have just been my young naivete. But I almost thought this thing was my friend. Before it showed up, I used to be terribly scared at night, whenever I stayed over at my grandma's or Honey's house. What with the house being directly in front of the shadow woods, and the farmhouse being its own brand of terrifying. That I shall save for another time. After my red-eyed buddy moved in, that fear seemed to dissipate. I would stay up late, a usual thing for my whole family as we're a bunch of night owls, and spend a lot of time just looking through the windows in the spare bedroom. I would watch the thing crawl across the grass from the tree line along the side of the house, and peek into my window, just staring at me with bright red eyes. I used to love to fall asleep listening to the radio that was on the bedside table, and I used to like to hum the songs while keeping watch out of the windows. Once I was asleep, I remember frequently waking to roll over in the middle of the night. I would hear the radio turn itself down before quietly clicking off, before falling back asleep. I used to ask my grandma if she was shutting it off, since the radio doesn't have anything like a timer to turn itself off, but she never did. She always assumed I was turning it off before falling asleep. Eventually I stopped asking. I honestly don't know quite how to explain why I thought this, or where the idea even came from, but I'd gotten the feeling that it was keeping the other things away from me. I attributed that to the calm I felt right now, instead of my usual anxiousness. At the time, I was grateful. At the time. I used to not dream while I slept there, which is very unlike me. I dream pretty much every night, even today. After a few months of the shadow being there, I began to have these very vivid dreams. I would either be at my grandma's house or the farmhouse, and I would be running from something, desperately trying to get to the other house. Only I wasn't quite running. I would be down on all fours on my stomach, barely able to crawl by grabbing handfuls of grass and yanking myself forward. My heart would be hammering in my chest, and I'd never get a glimpse of what I was running from. I'd wake in a cold sweat, shaking, wondering what the hell was going on. Those nightmares felt so real, and I'd wake sure that I'd failed in my escape and that I was going to die. When I could move again, I would sit up and hug my knees to my chest and just stare at the window, waiting for my heart to calm down. Sometimes I would have these dreams while at home, but mostly at my grandma's place. They're especially odd, since I'm not usually one for recurring dreams. They were always just a tad different, running from my grandma's to the farmhouse or vice versa, dragging down the dirt road or through the small field, separating the houses, hiding behind trees and bushes, avoiding the trails, but essentially the same. If I didn't wake up from the fright of it all upon arriving at the house I was running to in the odd dreams, the nightmare would morph into something else. One where I was back in the spare bedroom of my grandma's house, and it was simultaneously as if I was floating above the bed watching myself sleep, and still laying on the mattress. A dark shadow would phase through the window and stand at the foot of the bed, just in the corner. The shadow would stare and then slowly, ever so carefully, lay itself across the bed. Over the whole bed at first, and then beside me. I would slowly wake up in the morning, no longer out of my wits, scared at my running nightmare, and with a lingering feeling of someone holding my hand. I always woke alone. Occasionally, I would take walks in the shadow woods, not often, but sometimes, if I just needed to get away or was craving the need to be outside and out of parental view. My cousins and I were always queasy, riding our four-wheelers through the woods, let alone walking alone. But it was a good place to get away for a while. Even though I rarely went for walks in the woods, I would always make sure to stop at the edge of the trees and ask, nearly pray, for my shadow friend to protect me while I was inside. It sounds ridiculous, but like I've mentioned, there were other things in these woods, and those terrified me way more than this shadow that follows me ever could. Even to this day, I could usually sense the thing answering my ridiculous prayers and catch glimpses of a shadow dashing around the trees beside me as I walked. Even sometimes right behind or beside me. I never completely turned to look, but I knew it was there. I felt it, and not the other things. Needless to say, I was grateful again to it in a complicated sort of way. As I'm typing this, I'm realizing just how silly this must sound, or fake, or how absolutely dumb I must have been. But I swear to any deity listening that this is all true, and I was at the time, just a young teen, so you'll have to allow the usual amount of stupidity. It went on like this for years, all through middle school and most of high school, until I was about 17. I still got the running nightmares and the subsequent calming dreams afterwards. The only times I didn't get the follow-up dream was whenever I rarely had the nightmare while in my own bed at home. I would always end up being caught by whatever was chasing me, and wake up before reaching my destination in a panic. However, I began to see the shadow less and less over the years, only getting glimpses or feelings that it was there, watching me from the field or the window. I blame the thing for my subtle phobia that I'll see a face any time I glance into a window, even though I never felt overtly threatened by it myself, and it never had a face. Then all of it stopped. I went to college for a year, the dreams went away, and the past anxiousness I would feel on the property came back whenever I visited, instead of the strange calm the shadow gave me. I refuse to sleep in the spare room now, too scared to. Instead, I sleep on the couch in the living room, which unfortunately is right across from the sliding glass back door, facing the yard and the ever-dark woods. I never saw the shadow again until a few months ago. I'm 22 as I'm writing this. I'm more confident in myself and more emotionally stable than I used to be when I was younger. I can also say assuredly that this encounter scared me more than any other encounter I've ever had with anything. It's the reason I finally got the courage to talk about this in full. There's a recliner by the glass door that my ma likes to sit in, and we have a cat hammock in between it and the window. Spooky, said cat, who is perfectly named, loves to play in it and look out the window all hours of the day, and only hops down to follow my ma around, get food, or want to be let outside. Being the young, able-bodied daughter that I am, I would usually get up and let her outside so my ma wouldn't have to. One night while I'm staying over, I went to do just that. It's nighttime, pitch black outside except for the floodlight, and I get up off the couch to open the door. I'm just chatting casually with my ma, and listening to her talk about a new TV show she started watching. I open the glass door about halfway, and then open the screen door so Spooky can go out. She's about halfway out, when clear as day, from in front of me, just past the threshold, a little girl's voice calls out, "Mama!" Nope, that's a big fucking nope right there. I quickly booted the cat out and slammed the door shut, nearly falling backwards onto the coffee table as I yelped in fright. Every nerve is standing on end like I'm ready to bolt, which I really am, as I see a shadow slink away from the door and down the steps of the porch, disappearing from sight. It wasn't the cat, as she was pressed up against the screen wanting back inside. In retrospect, I felt super bad for kicking the cat out straight into that thing. My ma sat up and asked me what was wrong, and I told her. I asked if she'd heard a voice at all, and she said no. I didn't sleep easy that night. In fact, I didn't sleep at all until the sun was in the sky, and the blinds stayed firmly shut all night long. My initial reaction to it was, holy shit, a demon, because of how you hear about dark shadows and demons impersonating little girls a lot. But after having time to reflect, I began to wonder if it wasn't my mysterious follower. I hadn't seen it in years, and even though I hadn't outright felt its direct presence, the feeling never completely went away. However, I'm uncertain. The shadow never tried to scare me as far as I could remember, let alone fucking speak. It even was a huge comfort to me during some very hard times. The gentle solace of a friend during lonely times. Not to say I didn't have friends, but it was different, you know? I almost feel bad now that I thought it could ever be that shadow. As I've said, there's many spirits and odd, freaky things on that property, and in my grandma's house, and now I'm almost positive that it must have been the something else that actually stays in the house. Either way, the thought of the encounter still makes chills run up my spine, and I'm even more wary of that window than I'd ever been before. What's the most spectacular thing is that the next night, for the first time in years, I saw the shadow. It was dusk, and I happened to look out the window as I helped set the table for dinner. There it stood, standing along the grass line in the backyard, red eyes blazing as vividly as I remembered. I froze. The familiar feeling of paralyzing weird calm hit me, along with a muddled feeling of instinctual fear and relief. As crazy as that sounds, no more than 20 seconds might have passed before the shadow ducked down and bounded away through the grass with its odd lopping gait, back towards the woods. I have to wonder if the shadow was really the culprit for my scare, or if perhaps it had sensed my fright and was now, I don't know, awakened by it. I don't really have too many experiences at my grandma's house anymore, aside from the occasional noise or glimpse, so this felt violent and out of nowhere. Some childish part of me hopes that it will continue to protect me from the horrors that lurk in the dark. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 86. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Alright, where are we? Friday. Well, I'm trying to clear my weekend out so I can have a nice relaxing weekend, but I'll probably end up doing a bit of work on True Scary Stories 300, because I want to get it done ahead of time, because there's so much on it. Yeah, but I hope whatever you guys are doing, you're having a good time regardless. Okay, so and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.